Hey guys, welcome to the Holy Shed, coming to you from the wonderful, well, actually, I was going to say Melbourne, but we're actually west of Melbourne for a couple of days in the Victoria Grampians. Yeah, Australia's got Grampian Mountains too, and it's really lovely here. It's a bit windy, slightly chilly actually, and I'm sorry about the background noise. That's the wind, and there's some, I don't know if you can hear those cockatoos going at it over there. But hey, I'm in Oz. So I told you I might be a bit spasmodic doing sheds here, and well, I wasn't wrong. Hey, there are just too many pleasant distractions, and as anyone who knows me will understand, I am eminently distractible. But anyway, I have actually been still mooching around in my mind about some of the stuff that we've been talking about in recent Holy Sheds. Better humans for a better world. And I've been helped along in that process by a couple of great books that I'm reading. I always need more than one on the go. And one of them which I've bought while I've been here in Oz. And yeah, I think you'll be hearing a bit more about those at some point before too long. But at the moment, yesterday actually, I woke up early and I couldn't get back to sleep. So I listened to The Moral Maze, as you do, on the World Service of the BBC, using my ear pods so as not to stir my beloved from her beauty sleep. And as I'm sort of, dozing still a little bit, lo and behold, one of my favourite Islamic scholars, Mona Siddiqui, one of the panelists, suddenly roused me from my doziness when she came out with something that I found really interesting. She said, the core of Christianity is not love your neighbour. The core of Christianity is love your enemies. Wow. I mean, it just woke me up straight away, and I thought, that is so good. Of course, love your neighbour is a central tenet to the teachings of Jesus. However, in the Sermon on the Mount, he raised the bar hugely, saying, you've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that, he says, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Well, just leaving aside for a moment the question, it's a good question, of how do we define an enemy? The thing that strikes me in that verse, in that statement by Jesus, is that we don't demonstrate ourselves as children of God. We don't become children of God simply by loving our neighbour, but by loving our enemy. And I find that such a powerful thing. And I love it that it took an Islamic scholar to bring that home to me. I guess an enemy is someone excuse me, who we believe means us harm in some way, whether or not that's true. Someone that we are therefore tempted to dehumanize in our thinking, maybe with good reason. Maybe we feel they've dehumanized us. And yet Jesus tells us that we're to love that person. This doesn't require that we agree with them or that we approve of what they say or do. It doesn't mean pretending everything's okay. That's not what love is about. So what does it mean to love our neighbour? Well, I think it's worth remembering that love is not primarily a feeling, right? It's not an emotion. Love, I think, it's a choice, really, on one level. It's a practice, and it's something that you have to practice to maintain and get good at, something we commit to even when we don't necessarily feel like it. I think loving one's enemy might mean letting go of a grudge that we feel, refusing to remain vengeful and bitter toward that person. It means treating them as a fellow human being, even when we don't like them, by at least paying them the respect of listening to not just what they're saying, but trying to listen to where they are coming from as a person. That can often be very enlightening. So yeah, we can't generate feelings of goodwill or affection to someone, but we can make a decision about how we're going to treat them. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about. I think that what he's doing actually in this statement is expanding the circle. He's expanding the circle of inclusion, of compassion. And I really like that phrase, expanding the circle. It may not always be an easy thing to do, but I think it's a deeply Christian thing to do. It's a phrase I first came across actually in the work of Peter Singer in a book called Expanding the Circle, which was published in the early 80s, 1981 I think. Peter Singer is an Australian moral philosopher born, as it goes, in the very city of Melbourne in 1946. Singer's work centres on applied ethics, with a very strong emphasis on ethical relationships with animals. And I think ahead of most people, as far as I know, at the time, he talked about things like animal rights and animal liberation, which I know sounded bizarre to some people, but he saw this to be a really important line of thinking and behaving to pursue. He believed that we humans, often are guilty of something he calls speciesism, which is a form of anthropocentricity, really, isn't it? It's seeing ourselves as different and superior to other creatures. And he saw that that speciesism can be just as real a prejudice as racism or sexism or other forms of discrimination, through which we refuse to recognize the otherness of animals and the fact that they feel pain and suffering in a similar way to the way that we do. A central point in his book is that over the course of human history, people have expanded the circle of beings whose interests they are willing to value in a similar way to their own. So originally the circle might have been just self or family or tribe, but over time he observed the circle of inclusion grew to encompass other humans who also deserve to be in our circle of respect, and also, as I say, he inserted animals there too. It's a long time since I first encountered Singer's work, but back in the early 1990s I gave a talk at Greenbelt, the Greenbelt Festival, inspired by his book, in which I posed questions like, does the good news of Jesus Christ encompass non-animals too? Is the gospel in any way good news to animals, indeed to the whole of creation? I didn't know of other people asking that question, but it seemed to me to be obvious and important. To me, the phrase expanding the circle is, I think it is a gospel term. The good news of Christ is that the circle of God's love expands to encompass us all people, and not just all people, but all of creation too. I've always loved Andrei Rublev's 12th century icon of the Holy Trinity. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It pictures God in the form of three androgynous figures representing the Trinity, who are arrayed within a circle, and the circle is open at the front, making room for us, the onlooker, making room for all people, all creation, to participate in the inclusive fellowship and love of God. All of which brings us back to what I talked about last time, about open and closed systems, about the contrast between an open and a closed mentality, between inclusiveness and exclusion, between empathy and indifference. The right-wing activist and politician Charlie Kirk, who was brutally murdered just a short while back, as you know, he famously said, "I can't stand the word empathy." He said, "I think that empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage." Wow. And he particularly was thinking of this in the context of politics. Politics that he disliked. He saw empathy as a fixation of the left on people who are out there, instead of on those who he said should be the focus of American concern. And Charlie Kirk's close friend, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, attempted to elucidate something quite similar by appealing to Thomas Aquinas' phrase, ordo amoris, or the order of love. And he stated, you love your family, and then you love your neighbour, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that you can focus and prioritise the rest of the world. In other words, he believed in a kind of, a pyramid, really, of love and inclusion, with immediate loved ones at the pinnacle, and then there are outsiders at the bottom. Well, he was, of course, not that long ago, he was converted to Catholicism, so I think he became an expert on Aquinas. But before he died, Pope Francis put him right on that, really, with his interpretation of Aquinas. He said this, he said, the true ordo amoris, the true order of love, is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. He said that's where we go to discover the real nature of love, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. So one of my main problems with a lot of right-wing politics, with right-wing theology actually expressed definitely in things like Christian nationalism, is that it diminishes instead of expands the circle of inclusion. It generates an us versus them, which in religious terms results in a mentality of Christians and non-Christians, us and them, the saved and the unsaved, etc., etc. Now, the thing is, I don't find any of that in the life or teachings of Jesus in the Gospels. What we find in the Gospels is that he often elevated outsiders to become models of faith. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Gentile or the Syrophoenician woman, or the Roman centurion, both of whom he held up as models of faith, and saying that he hadn't found such great faith in all of Israel. And then there's the parable of the Good Samaritan, of course, in which an outsider is portrayed as the hero of the day, the hero of the story. He also told the Pharisees and that those that they considered to be impure, tax collectors and publicans and prostitutes, etc., he said these people were entering the kingdom of God ahead of the Pharisees. To me, the expanding circle of inclusion has never been more of a priority than it is today. In the light of growing geopolitical tension, hello, minor bird, in the light of growing geopolitical tension, and of course the climate emergency, these are times when we need to be together as fellow citizens of the wonderful planet Earth. And all other divisions or distinctions really need to be subjugated, I think, to this one overriding priority, which is recognizing not just a common humanity, but that we share in a common earthling identity or family. We desperately need to unify instead of isolate, merge rather than separate, recognize as I say, a common humanity and a planetary citizenship, instead of fragmenting and pulling down the shutters on each other and on our fellow creatures. Which, is precisely why I personally voted to remain in the EU. Not because I imagined that the EU was or is an institution, as an institution, a wonderful thing. Far from it. I saw it and see it as a broken and massively in need of reform. But I favoured a world in which we work together to fix things instead of pulling apart and going our own way. Not now, I'm not in any way having a go at people who did vote for Brexit or who may still support that. I mean, there are valid debates here, and I understand them. That's all fine. I don't want to, denigrate anybody who voted differently to me. My simple point is that I think we live in times when we need to be expanding, not diminishing, the circles of inclusion in our world. We need to stand together more, fix things together, find answers, because, and I've quoted this, I've quoted him before on this, Martin Luther King so wisely said, we must learn to live together as brothers, sisters and brothers, or perish together as fools. And that's still, a deeply relevant sentiment, I think. Because the fact is, guys, we can do better. We must do better as people across our various divides and differences. A better world results from people behaving better, working together, striving together for the good of all, and not just, as I say, fragmenting and pursuing the interests of our own selves and our group, whether that's a religious group like fellow Christians, or fellow English people, Scottish, British, American, whatever. There's something more profound and important than these differences. And that, I think, is what we need to, find again. Because I fear that we're entering another period in history of tribalism, where we focus on looking after our own instead of constantly expanding the circle. To answer the question Jesus was asked, who is my neighbour, by basically saying all, including those we might consider our enemies. So I'll leave you with this thought. How can we, how can you, how can I expand the circle right here, right now, where we are? And I think that's the question that we need to, in a way, wake up with every day. How today am I going to expand the circle beyond, that which is familiar and comforting, and perhaps just go over into a more challenging realm of connecting with other people and with the world at large. When the world around us, or, our own little world, feels insecure and scary, the temptation is to cut and run, to isolate, to gather simply with our own, with those who see the world as we do, who reassure and buttress our own sort of view of things, close down the channels of compassion and empathy, build walls. But these reactions are the very opposite to what's required. And what I think Jesus taught and demonstrated in his life as we have it in the Gospels. When the world feels scary, we need to open up, build relationships, strengthen friendships, and yes, even commit to loving our enemies by refusing to dehumanize those who we feel do not necessarily have our own well-being at heart. So here's a prayer which is from my book. It's called Doubts and Loves, and it's about these very things. God of friends and enemies, whose love conspires to blur the line between the two, enlarge our souls that we may gaze into the eyes of another, to find ourselves looking back, even when minds and hearts are worlds apart. Teach us to stand resilient, owning our truth with fortitude, while attending also to doubts and loves, longing to be heard. Help us to see that despite the consolation certainty yields, truth always comes to us as a crumb and never an entire loaf. Amen. Well, there it is. I'll drink to that. To love, not hate. To empathy, not indifference. To life, not death. To life, L'chaim. And there it is. Excuse me. If you like what I'm about, here in the Holy Shed, guess what? You can support us. You can buy us a coffee. And you know how to do that. I haven't got the details on the screen right now, have I? But there you go. And we're very grateful to all of you who support us in that way and lots of other ways too. Meanwhile, well, the Grampians are calling me, and as you can hear, cockatoos are calling too. And so I think we're going to get about our day and have some fun, and I'll speak to you again soon. All right, lots of love. Bye.